Joining us now on segment number 34 of the Instant Preview and Reaction series is Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register and author of Showtime, the inside story of Shohei Ohtani and the greatest baseball season ever played, Jeff Fletcher. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us here on the Instant Preview series. How are things going on the West Coast?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that everyone wants to know is, this is the last year of the contract for the aforementioned Shohei Ohtani. He just left to go to Team Japan, or I guess to go pitch for Team Japan. Excuse me, just I think it was yesterday or whatnot. How has he looked the last few days prior to his departure to his homeland?
Yeah, his only game he pitched, he did fine. He faced 8 hitters, didn't give up any runs, struck out a few. I think he hit about 99 miles an hour with his fastball. So everything looks good to go. He looks good at the plate. He only had like 5 or 6 at bats, but I don't think anybody's too concerned about him.
So when you say not too concerned about him in terms of, pitching wise or anything like that, but, where are the rumblings at, in terms of, since it is his last year on the deal, there were a lot of rumors in the offseason with him potentially, or certain other teams, like especially in this area here in New York, wanting him potentially with the Mets, trading for him or anything like that. Has there been any rumbling or anything along those lines in the early goings of spring training?
Well, the Angels made it pretty clear that they're not trading him.
Yeah.
And I think that once they didn't trade him at the deadline last year, then it was pretty obvious that they were going to keep him this year too, because they're trying to win, and even if they have no chance of re-signing him, for 2024, and I'm not saying they don't, but even if they didn't, they still are trying to win in 2023, and there's no way you can trade him and be better in 2023. If you trade him, you're going to get like a bunch of young guys, and it might be better in 2026 or something like that. But the Angels are not in the same situation that like the Nationals were in when they traded Juan Soto. The Angels are not rebuilding, so it doesn't make any sense for them to trade Ohtani. Now, if we get to this July of 23 and they're out of it then, at that point, certainly you could trade him. But as of now, they're still trying to win and make the playoffs in 23, so they're going to keep him.
Mike, I'm going to throw it to you.
Hey, Jeff, thanks once again so much for joining us to talk about the Angels here. One thing I wanted to throw out there, I know Mike Trout threw out the quote, and we've heard it so much, and everybody wanting to talk about how much, wanting to try and finally get to the playoffs and get Mike Trout to that stage of the season. But he was talking about how much, it's this year, this has to be the year for the Angels to make the playoffs. Where do you see that in the AL West? We obviously know that the Astros are there, the Mariners are coming up. Do you see them being able to potentially put a run together to be able to squeeze through there? What really has to go right for them to fulfill Trout's kind of urgency there?
Well, they definitely have the pieces that could be a playoff team. Last year, for all these years, most of the years they struggled. They didn't have enough pitching. And then last year, their pitching was actually pretty good. I think they were like ninth in the majors in ERA. And the problem was they couldn't score, which was because they had a lot of, Anthony Rendon got hurt, Jared Walsh got hurt, Mike Trout was out for 5 weeks. David Fletcher, who had been a pretty good offensive player before, he was hurt. And they just had zero depth. The guys that they were putting in the lineup to replace these guys were just not major league players. So what they've done now is they've added guys like Brandon Drury, Gio Urshela, Hunter Renfroe, and they hope that they now will have a much tougher lineup, that's not going to be, just 5 guys deep on some nights, that every night it's 7 or 8 or 9 guys deep, and they can consistently score. And if they just do that and get the same pitching as they got last year, then they should be instantly a contender. They're probably not going to win 100 games and knock off the Astros, but with 6 teams going to the playoffs in each league, I think they definitely have the potential to compete for one of those spots.
Yeah. Also, just pivoting also into spring training from there. Anybody trying to try and make the roster? Any prospects that you've been able to see in spring training here have excited you? I know there's been a lot of talk about Joe Adell trying to get into that roster. I'm trying to continue his development after being this prize prospect once. Is there anybody else or that excites you or have really intrigued you so far in the first couple of days of spring training?
Well, the number one prospect in the organization is Logan O'Hoppe, who is a catcher they got from the Phillies last year for Brandon Marsh at the trading deadline. Basically, the Phillies, O'Hoppe was blocked by JT Realmuto, and Marsh was pretty much blocked by Mike Trout. So the teams just swapped them. And O'Hoppe looks like he is going to be their catcher of the future. And the question is, how soon does the future start? Is it on opening day this year, or is it in June of this year, or is it next year? But at some point, he's going to be their everyday catcher. And, we haven't really seen enough of him in spring training to really know if he's ready now, but he seems to have the makeup and the potential and the tools and all that to get there. So it's just a question of how fast. And, you mentioned Joe Adell. He's a guy that used to be a super prospect. At his peak, he was, one of the top 5 prospects in all of baseball, but he just hasn't put it together. And right now they've sort of built the team not counting on him anymore. They don't have a spot for him even on the roster, let alone an everyday lineup. So, but he's just oozes with talent. He just hasn't performed. So this spring is really another chance for him to finally show if he can put things together and force his way in, or if at worst, turn himself into a good trade chip. So it's really interesting to watch, what happens with him.
Go ahead.
Take it over.
Jeff, again, thank you so much for taking a few minutes here with us. I really want to touch back on the Trout piece, because I feel like a lot of the Angels season, and understandably so for such a generational player, just circles around how Trout will perform on the field and what Trout will be in 2023, regarding his health. Because I just feel like the way the history of the Angels has been in recent years is they go as Trout goes, and again, understandably so. But you said it before with respect to health, and early on in spring training, what have you noticed about, is he back to being light on his feet? And also just to kind of touch on the Rendon piece as well. I mean, will we see a full healthy season out of him this year? And if so, will we see him kind of regain the form that the Angels expected to get when they acquired him from the Nationals?
Well, as for Trout, I mean, he's pretty much always been good, and the Angels have not always been good. So I don't really think the Angels have gone as he's gone. He's gone without them, basically. So so far in spring training, he looks fine. Seems to be moving okay. He's hit the ball fine in his first few games. It's hard to really judge, but he says he feels great. He says his back is not an issue at all, which is what he missed 5 weeks with last year. He said it's 100%. And he feels well enough. He's going to play in the WBC, which some people are going to be holding their breath over a little bit. But
I'm sure
he says he's fine, and I think that we all can believe that he's not going to do anything to sacrifice, the Angels' chances either, because he obviously wants to get to the postseason more than anybody. So I don't think he's going to sacrifice that for the sake of the WBC. So he feels ready to go. As for Anthony Rendon, he also says he's fine now. He had wrist surgery last year, and he did get back just at the very end of the season just to play a couple games, just to sort of assure himself that he would have a healthy offseason. I think they're not really planning on him playing 162 games. I think that if he can play 140, I think they would be happy, and they're just going to give him regular days off. And that's, again, what they've got Gio Urshela for, is so they can not ride him into the ground, and if they feel like they give him enough days off that he can keep off the injured list and just stay out there for 140 games, that's going to be a huge improvement, because he's been playing like 40 or 50 games each of the last 2 years, and that's been not good enough.
You spoke a little bit about how good the Angels pitching was last year. Obviously, a lot of that anchored by Shohei and his pitching prowess, but the Angels going out there and acquiring a nice little piece from across town in Tyler Anderson. How formidable now? I mean, the Angels were 9th in the majors last year in ERA, as you alluded to. How much more formidable does it make the Angels pitching staff going into 2023?
Well, certainly it could be better. And they, their bullpen really had some stretches where it was pretty bad last year, and they feel like they've cleaned that up. They feel like Ryan Tepera and Aaron Loop definitely can perform better than they performed last year, and they got Carlos Estevez from the Rockies, who's a guy, and if you look at his stats when he's out of Coors Field, his slider is a much better pitch. He's a real swing and miss kind of guy. And Matt Moore had a really good year last year with the Rangers. So they just feel like they got all these pieces that if they throw them together and can keep them healthy, which is a big question, that they could be better than they were last year. And, Tyler Anderson obviously, basically replaced Noah Syndergaard. So if Tyler Anderson can be better than Noah Syndergaard was last year, then that's an upgrade. So we'll see how it works out. They mostly avoided injuries to the pitching staff last year. So that's definitely something that you can't take for granted that will absolutely happen again. But we'll just see how it works out.
You spoke a little bit about how much depth, and we keep kind of touching on that point about how much depth the Angels have going into this year, maybe as opposed to years past. But I feel like the one thing that has kind of victimized the Angels in years past is they've just always fall into this area maybe of morbid mediocrity where, I'm no one's saying they're going to catch the Astros, and we see that the Mariners are certainly on the upswing. We know the Rangers got better this year. I mean, we know the A's will be in the cellar, but what is it? What is your perfect recipe? I mean, you spoke again about depth, but what is your perfect recipe? For the Angels really to make the playoffs? Like, what needs to happen? What are the key things that need to happen in order for the Angels to get there?
Well, if they can just keep guys healthy, they should make the playoffs. Probably the lineup that they're putting out there, in spring training right now, is definitely good enough. And if they keep their pitching healthy, they should get there. Now, in the long term, the recipe is their farm system needs to be much more productive, because that's really what the problem has been through all this years of wasting Mike Trout and, people saying, well, it's because they don't make the right moves in the winter, or they don't sign enough. They didn't sign Garrett Cole or any of these kind of things. None of that is really the problem. It's that their farm system has been terrible. So they're just relying entirely on basically players you get from other teams, and you only get players from other teams if there's something wrong with them, or they're too old, they make too much money, they're injured, whatever. So you just can't build a sustainable team on that. I mean, look at the Astros. The Astros are just overflowing with homegrown players. It's not that they've gone and bought themselves a World Series or anything. So that's what the Angels have to do. They're slowly trying to get there. They're making some progress, but they still have some work to do. So they kind of in the short term need for guys like Hunter Renfroe, Brandon Drury, Gio Urshela, Tyler Anderson to perform well, and while they're getting, improvements from, Patrick Sandoval or, a pitcher like Ben Joyce or Logan O'Hoppe or Jared Walsh being better, or all those kind of things need to happen sort of in the background while they're waiting to have a really good farm system.
Jeff, I got to ask you this, and you brought up about, and I know, and I know we said this ad nauseum about the depth here, but something that has really stuck out is, Patrick Sandoval. He's only 26 years old, and he, granted, did not have a great win-loss record last year, but we kind of expected that, but had a fantastic ERA of 2.91, 27 games played and started. Is he? How has he looked in spring training in the early going? And does he potentially have that I guess breakout factor, if you will, where maybe the team could put up some runs behind him if he could do well with all this depth that they've got?
Well, I mean, he's pitched 2 innings in spring training, and he didn't give up any runs, so he's been perfect, I guess. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
He's going to go pitch for Team Mexico in the WBC. His dad is Mexican, so we'll get to see him a little more there. But he's the kind of guy that basically nobody really talks about. But if his last 2 years happened in the 2 years leading into free agency, he would be a guy that you would be talking about signing for $120 million or $150 million or something like that. I mean, you look up like Patrick Corbin, like what he did in his 2 years before free agency. And It wasn't like he had this huge storied career. He was just really good for those 2 years in a row. And basically that's what Patrick Sandoval has just done. And the Angels still have him for 3 more years. So he's definitely a guy that has been under the radar very good. I think they'd like to see him manage his pitch count a little better and cut down his walks a little bit, which would get him more innings. But even still, he threw like 149 innings last year, which, and nowadays that's that's pretty good. And if they could bump that up to, 160, 165, then you're looking at a guy who's, a top of the rotation pitcher. And if they have him and Ohtani and Tyler Anderson, that's a pretty good start. And they got a kid who was a rookie last year, Reed Detmers, pitched a no-hitter, and he was really good the second half. I think he had about a 3.75 ERA, something like that. And he's not even had one full season of Major League service. So they've got pieces there. They just need to keep them healthy, and they need to score some runs.
Jeff, you brought up about a solid second half by some of those pitchers. Another player that had a solid second half or a solid finish to the season was Taylor Ward. Is he leading the way as the starting left fielder? Is it sustainable what he did at the end of last year? What do you expect there in terms of pretty much the corner outfielder spots around Trout?
Well, Taylor Ward is really interesting because he really came out of nowhere last year, and he had this ridiculous first month. His OPS in the first month was like 1190, which is basically better than Aaron Judge's for the season. Now, granted, it was only for a month. And then he ran into the fence and trying to catch a ball, and he got a shoulder stinger. So he sort of wasn't injured, so he didn't go on the IL, but he just lost kind of all the strength in his swing.
Wow.
And so for the next 3 months, he wasn't very good. But then he kind of got over that, and over the last month, he was really good again. He had like a 960 OPS. So even though, and when you take all that and put it together, that came out to like 830, which was like 21st in all of baseball, which was still pretty good, even with 3 months where he wasn't healthy. So some people might say, well, 830 OPS, that's his big breakthrough, and he's going to drop back down to earth and be more like 770, 780 or whatever this year. But the way he looks at it is that he was only healthy. When he was healthy, it was, 900 plus OPS. And if he does that all year, then he thinks he has even more of a breakthrough to go. I don't know. We'll see. But if it really was only the injury that affected that slump in the middle of the season and he doesn't get hurt again, then you think there is some more upside there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a couple more questions for you, Jeff, and then we'll let you go. But, obviously, and this is officially the last point about depth here, but I know the catcher spot, obviously, behind Max Stassi, don't really know, not off the top of my head anyway, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but, I saw some rumblings that the Angels were in the market for potentially a backup catcher or anything along those lines. Or even, someone that would be playing behind Stassi if O'Hoppe is not ready to go, or if he needs some more work in the minor leagues. Do they go after someone like maybe Gary Sanchez, who's still on the market potentially as a backup behind Stassi?
I mean, I don't think so. I think Gary Sanchez was worse than Stassi was last year, and there's a reason that he hasn't signed with anybody yet, and. Yeah. I think that, the Angels might have kicked the tires on him a little bit. Phil Nevin is now the Angels manager, obviously was there with him in New York. But the Angels, between Stassi and O'Hoppe and Matt Thaiss, who's out of options, I think they feel like that's enough for them because, like, O'Hoppe is the long-term catcher, no question. So it's just a matter of, until O'Hoppe proves that he's ready, how do you shuffle these guys around? And Stassi was actually really good in 2020 and 2021. So, and they do give him a lot of credit, even though he was a terrible hitter last year, for the pitching staff being 9th best in baseball. So I think they feel like if he just does the same thing behind the plate and is a little more at the plate like he was the 2 previous years, then that's certainly good enough to get them through until O'Hoppe is ready, because then they feel O'Hoppe can be, really good offensively and defensively.
West Islip native for all of the Long Islanders that will be watching and listening to our segment here, not too far from where we are out here on Long Island. Ian Schraier, take it home.
Jeff, I know in the offseason there was a lot of talk, and just to kind of bring this whole conversation full circle back, especially back to and including Ohtani's future with the Angels. We know that Artie Moreno had said that he wanted to sell the team. Now he's not selling. What are things looking like in your opinion out of the owner's box going forward, and how does that stipulate a little bit in the future of whether or not Shohei Ohtani stays or not?
Well, that's a great question. We have not talked to Artie Moreno. in a very long time, and we would love to ask him some questions. I mean, it's sort of a Rorschach test when you look at the ink blot, like what it looks like. You can say, well, Artie being back actually helps them sign Ohtani because, now that Artie is back and he's decided he just really wants to win, maybe he's going to just put all the chips in and go for it. Or maybe it hurts because the next owner could have been Steve Cohen and was going to be, Steve Cohen, quote unquote, could have just spent like endless amount of money. So the bottom line is we don't know. I think that the Angels don't even know. I think a lot of it is going to depend on how they perform this year. Ohtani obviously wants to win, and he wants to make a lot of money. I believe the Angels can accommodate the latter, and we're all going to have to see if they can do the former. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register and author of Showtime, the inside story of Shohei Ohtani and the greatest baseball season ever played, Jeff Fletcher. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us here tonight on the instant preview and reaction series. And we hope that we have you back at some point, and good luck in spring training.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a few short moments here on the Eastern Observer.